As the Nazi regime expanded across Europe, it needed more than soldiers and tanks to control millions. It needed fear, silence, and ruthless efficiency. It needed someone who could turn ideology into policy, and policy into death. That someone arrived not with fanfare, but through ranks of quiet terror. He was a lawyer by training, a bureaucrat by instinct, and a loyal servant of the SS. What set him apart was not charisma or visibility, but his ability to manage an empire of surveillance, torture, and extermination without a moment's hesitation. In 1943, this man stepped into one of the most powerful and deadly positions in the Third Reich, head of the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA. With that appointment, he assumed control of the Gestapo, the SD, and the administrative machinery of the Holocaust. Camps ran on his orders. Files flowed to his desk, and millions vanished under the weight of his system. His name was Ernst Kaltenbrunner. This is how he built an empire of death, without ever leaving the shadows. He was a man of law by education, but of brutality by action. From mass arrests to interrogations, from deportations to mass executions, Kaltenbrunner's name was signed across some of the darkest chapters of the Holocaust. Captured after the war, he became the highest-ranking SS officer to stand trial at Nuremberg. This is the story of Ernst Kaltenbrunner, how a lawyer became the executioner of millions. Early life and path to the SS. Ernst Kaltenbrunner was born on October 4, 1903, in the small town of Ried im Innkreis, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was raised in a Catholic middle-class family and known for his imposing height and cold, disciplined demeanor. From a young age, he seemed drawn to structure and authority, traits that would later define his rise in one of the most brutal regimes in history. He studied law at the universities of Graz and Linz, where he earned his doctorate. But while his legal education offered a path toward justice, Kaltenbrunner turned instead to radical nationalist politics. In the chaotic post-war years, he joined anti-Semitic and fascist circles, convinced that Austria needed order and purification through authoritarian means. In the late 1920s, Kaltenbrunner joined the then illegal Austrian Nazi Party. He quickly rose through underground paramilitary networks, organizing propaganda and political agitation. After the failed 1934 Nazi coup in Austria, he was arrested for suspected involvement in the assassination of Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss. He was released, but his loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi cause was never in question. When Nazi Germany annexed Austria in 1938, Kaltenbrunner was rewarded with a top SS and police leadership post in Vienna. There, he implemented brutal purges, rounded up political enemies, and orchestrated the early deportations of Austrian Jews. His ruthless efficiency earned him the trust of Heinrich Himmler and laid the groundwork for an even more deadly promotion. Reign of Fear, the RSHA and the Holocaust. In 1943, Kaltenbrunner was appointed head of the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, taking over after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. This role placed him in charge of the Gestapo, the SD, and all security and intelligence operations across the Nazi regime. From this office, he coordinated terror on a continental scale. He oversaw the logistics of the final solution, ensuring that trains ran to Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor with cold efficiency. Deportation orders passed through his office. Medical experiments were approved under his watch. Prisoners were interrogated, tortured, and executed following policies he either signed or endorsed. In occupied territories, he ordered collective punishments. Entire villages in Poland and the Balkans were wiped out in retaliation for resistance activity. His directives allowed mass shootings, deportations, and arbitrary arrests, making him one of the principal architects of Nazi terror outside the battlefield. Kaltenbrunner rarely appeared in public. He avoided speeches and propaganda, preferring to operate from behind a desk. But make no mistake, his influence was vast, and his paperwork sealed the fates of millions. He was not a loud ideologue. He was the man who made death systematic, collapse and capture. As the tide of war turned against Nazi Germany in 1944, Kaltenbrunner's grip on the Nazi police and security state became increasingly desperate. He doubled down on repression, expanding torture programs and increasing the number of public executions meant to deter resistance. Within the Reich Main Security Office, he demanded more aggressive crackdowns, greater secrecy, and the elimination of anyone who could later testify to Nazi crimes. He also oversaw intensified efforts to destroy evidence of the Holocaust. Orders went out to camp commandants to incinerate documents, dismantle facilities, and kill surviving witnesses. As the Soviets advanced from the east and the Western Allies from the west, death marches were ordered from camps like Auschwitz and Mauthausen. Prisoners, already weakened from starvation, were forced to march hundreds of kilometers. Thousands died from exhaustion, disease, or were shot when they could no longer keep pace. Kaltenbrunner's role in orchestrating these final atrocities was significant. He remained in close contact with camp officials and police commanders, issuing directives that prioritized secrecy and total destruction. In one infamous instance, he authorized the immediate execution of a group of French resistance fighters, including women, without trial, fearing they might be liberated. In May 1945, following Hitler's suicide and the collapse of Berlin, Kaltenbrunner fled into hiding in the Austrian Alps. Disguised and carrying false identity papers, he posed as a medical doctor. But on May 12, American forces arrested him. At the time of capture, he remained cold and formal, convinced his status as an administrator might shield him from punishment. But investigators quickly uncovered a mountain of evidence. Signed orders, internal RSHA correspondence, and testimonies from survivors all pointed to Kaltenbrunner as one of the key overseers of the Nazi terror machine. Trial and execution at Nuremberg. At Nuremberg, Kaltenbrunner was indicted for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to wage aggressive war. He tried to portray himself as an intelligence official with no control over camp operations, but the evidence dismantled his defense. Signed orders, transport logs, and meeting records showed that he had deep involvement in Holocaust planning and execution. Witnesses testified to his role in organizing deportations and endorsing torture. His signature was found on death warrants and directives authorizing collective reprisals. Kaltenbrunner remained defiant throughout the trial. He expressed no remorse and continued to insist that he had merely followed orders. But the tribunal saw him for what he was, a man who had helped design and sustain the Nazi state's architecture of murder. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. On October 16, 1946, Ernst Kaltenbrunner was hanged at Nuremberg. His final words were cold and detached, "Germany, good luck." A final salute from a man who had long turned law into a weapon, and whose justice finally caught up with him.